A personal testimony. The following testimony is given by Rabbi Eli Silverstein, Chabad Shliach of a college campus in Ithaca, New York. A non-religious woman in her 90s named Sandra Brand decided to donate her money to purchase old Sifrei Torah that were no longer in use, refurbish them, and give them to college campuses that have special minyanim for students with minimal connection to Judaism. At that time, I didn't have a Sefer Torah yet, and I needed one, so I called her. She spoke a fluent Yiddish, and when I asked her how she knew Yiddish, she surprised me by telling me that she was from a town in Galicia and had grown up in the home of a Belzer Chassid. I was curious and asked her why she spent significant resources donating Sifrei Torah to Chabad campuses. She told me her incredible story. My father, Rebbe Belzer Brand, was a big contractor and had become very wealthy building asphalt roads for the Polish government. He was an Ehrliche Yid and a passionate and prominent Belzer Chassid. He was a big supporter of the Belzer Meisters and the Belzer Rebbe. My older sisters had all married Choshever Belzer Jungelite, who he supported while they learned Torah. It was considered a very Choshever family. I was a teenager, and I wanted to be less restricted than the insular lifestyle that my family lived, and somehow I became friends with a non-religious boy who came from a non-religious home. He was so far removed from Yiddishkeit that he didn't even speak Yiddish. In Poland, even non-frum Yidden spoke Yiddish, and only completely assimilated Yidden didn't speak Yiddish. Of course, I didn't dare tell my parents that I had befriended him, but our relationship grew very close, to the point where we decided to get married. I couldn't do this in my hometown because I knew the Rabbonim would tell my father, and he would never agree to such a thing. So I secretly traveled to another city where we found a Rav who was willing to marry us. After the wedding, I came back home and continued living at home just as before, never telling my parents that I was actually married. I would sneak out of the house to spend time with my husband, until I finally realized that I couldn't continue like this, and I worked up the courage to tell my parents the truth. When I broke the news of my marriage at the age of 18 to a non-frum boy, they were extremely upset. They said that they were throwing me out of the house, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. This was my worst fear, because I really didn't want to lose my family. At that time, my father was facing a very serious court case against a Polish goy who also had a business building roads for the government. He was jealous of my father, who did a much finer job and was receiving most of the contracts. He informed the government that my father was doing something illegal and got my father into a lot of trouble. He hoped that since my father was a Jew, the government would easily rule against him, thus taking care of his competition once and for all. The government geared up for a fierce prosecution and created serious charges against him, and my father was facing the prospect of losing all his money and having to spend years in prison. So he decided to go to the Belzer Rebbe, Harav Aharonai Keach, Zchusa Yagein Aleinu, who lived from 1880 to 1957, the fourth and previous Belzer Rebbe, known as Rebbe Arele. When I heard about this, I immediately asked my father to go along with him. My father asked me why I would want to come along, and I explained that if he was going to ask the Rebbe about a huge business problem, he should also ask him about the fact that he wanted to cut me out of his life. My father replied that there was no reason to ask the Rebbe about the issue, since the Rebbe was obviously of the opinion that there is no place for such behavior in a Yiddish home. I argued that I wanted to hear it directly from the Rebbe. And finally, my father agreed to take me along, certain that the Rebbe would agree with him. So we traveled to the Rebbe together. My father first discussed his troubles with his Goyish competition and told him the whole story with the impending court case. The Rebbe closed his eyes and put down his head for a few moments, and then advised my father to offer the troublemaker a partnership in his business in exchange for dropping his charges against him. My father was shocked at the idea of partnering with this goy who didn't do a good job, and that now he would have to give half of all of his income to him. The Rebbe responded, "Halb is besser von gar nicht. Half is better than nothing." Parenthetically, this plan actually worked, and the goy agreed to the idea. My father even ended up benefiting from the partnership, since he received many more contracts from anti-Semites who didn't want to do business with a Jew, but since there was a Goy involved, those who discriminated against Jews agreed to give them the contracts. So they ended up getting a lot more contracts, and half the profits was a lot more than he used to make in the past. Then my father told the Rebbe the story about me, his daughter, who slipped away from the Yiddishkeit path and secretly married an irreligious boy, Rahman al-Islam, and how he wanted to throw me out of his house and his life. Belz in general is very insular, and the idea that someone would do such a thing, especially in those days in Galicia, was so foreign that it was obvious to my father that the Rebbe would tell him to throw me out and cut me off. Once again, the Rebbe closed his eyes and lowered his head deep in thought, but this time it was for about 10 minutes. We anxiously waited and waited until finally he raised his head and asked my father, "She had a chuppah and kedushin according to halacha?" My father said yes. "In that case, you should take her and him into your house and support them just like you support your other sons-in-law, the Talmidei Chachamim and Koilel Jungelite, and treat them like family." This was exactly the opposite of what my father expected. And this was in the 1920s, not 2020s. The Belzer Rav was a tzaddik with incredible foresight. My father, Rebbe Zya, was shocked and barely managed to stutter his objection. "But he is so far removed from Yiddishkeit," the Rebbe repeated himself. "Take him in, be nice to him, draw him close to you, treat him like all your other sons-in-law, support him and treat him like your own family." My father was totally shocked, but as a good chassid, he followed exactly what his Rebbe instructed him. He invited this young man, whom he had never met, into his house. It was very hard for him, but he did it, and he supported us and treated us like all of his children. I had my family back. Shortly after this, the war broke out. My parents and family Nebuch were killed al Kiddush Hashem, as were my husband and our young 5-year-old son. The woman continued, "After the war, I came to America and married a traditional but not from Jewish lawyer. I once traveled to Eretz Yisrael and went to visit the Belzer Rav. And as soon as I walked in, he immediately recognized me and said, 'Ah, Reb Leizer Brand's daughter.' He spoke to me very warmly about his memories of my father. I was so touched by his warmth directed at me, in spite of my non-conformance to a religious lifestyle. He treated me like I was one of them. As I have gotten older, I began to feel guilty about the pain and suffering that I caused my parents, and I always remember that the Belzer Rebbe made sure that I wasn't thrown out despite the fact that I wasn't behaving like a good frum girl. So I decided that I will do everything I can to help those who are helpful to other Jews who are not behaving properly. I was fortunate to make a lot of money, and although I am very old, I still travel around to find good Yidden who love those who are not frum and bring them closer to Judaism with love and warmth. So I donate Sifrei Torah specifically to these places where Yiddishkeit is sparse. And I have the names of my parents embroidered onto the mantle, the cover of each Sefer Torah. But the story doesn't end there. Rabbi Eli Silverstein, the Chabad Shliach, adds, "Over the years I kept in touch with her. When she was 96 years old, I took the opportunity to say something very daring. It's certainly very nice that you are assisting outreach centers by donating Sifrei Torah in your parents' memory and helping to bring unaffiliated Jews back to their roots. But I'm sure that your parents in Gan Eden would be overjoyed if they would see you come back in a significant way to Yiddishkeit. So while it's nice to do it for others, perhaps you should do something for yourself." She responded positively and said, "Sure, I would love to. But what should I do? How do I start?" I said, "Start with just one easy thing. Say Shema Yisrael every day, and you'll be Makabel Oil Malchus Shemayim. You'll accept Hashem's sovereignty over the world. And that will be a great step." She responded, "Okay, good. So let's do it now." So here I was, sitting with an elderly woman who was not frum for about 80 years of her life. And right then and there, we said the holy words together, one at a time. She told me that she wants to say it every morning when she wakes up. So I showed her how to wash her hands properly, and she decided that as soon as she wakes up each morning, the first thing she will do is wash her hands properly and be makabel ol malchus shemaim by saying these holy words. She passed away 2 weeks later, and she was buried in the Belzer Rebbe in Israel. So, after everything she went through, she merited to return back to her roots, back to accepting Ol Malchus Shemaim, back to her beloved community of Belz that didn't reject her, and back to her beloved parents in Gan Eden. There are at least 2 practical life lessons to learn from this incredible story. 1. If Sandra's parents would have thrown her away in the name of their religious values, would this miraculous ending ever happen? Her teshuvah was mi'ahava, from the love and acceptance shown by her parents, her community, and directly from the clear direction of the holy Belzer Rebbe Zya Yagein Aleinu. So we see that even if it takes a long time to see results, this is the authentic Torah approach to this kind of painful issue. 2. While we want our children to merit living a frum life of Torah mitzvahs, we must remember that the main thing is that they should end up in Gan Eden for eternity. We have a beautiful religion that allows someone to become a Baal Tshuva even at the last moment of their life, and Hashem appreciates when those who are so far away return to Him. As long as the candle burns, there is hope. The main job is for parents to make sure that the memory of their love and acceptance will warm their child's heart and allow them to come back to them whenever it will be possible. Undoubtedly, it is the admiration that Sandra felt for her parents who agreed to support her financially and emotionally, even though she caused them so much pain, anguish, grief, and embarrassment. Her community that never abandoned her even after she abandoned their religious values. And her holy leader who stood up for her and showered her with unconditional acceptance. That encouraged her to proactively help those spreading the light of Yiddishkeit during her life and ultimately saved her eternal afterlife.